I was in Nicaragua, which is one of my favorite places. If I had been doing any political activities there, everyone would know about it because everything I do and what we do is public. There's no reason for anything to be hidden. But I was just basically, it was an extremely cold winter, unusually cold winter in DC. February is always a horrible month. And so we just got out of there and went kind of on a vacation. And on my way back, as most of you probably know, I passed through San Salvador and El Salvador, and then flew into Dulles International Airport. And in an incident which the Dulles brothers would have been proud of, coming into right as I came into the customs line with my family, a officer was standing there from Customs and Border Protection, and he said, "Mr. Blumenthal." And, I knew what was next. It wasn't something that I wasn't totally prepared for, given the wave of repression and surveillance of journalists, dissident journalists, or critical journalists and activists across the West, especially in Europe, as we discussed last week with Ali Abunema. But with me, I still kind of wondered, like, what are they actually wanting to talk to me about? Like, I'm not coming from Beirut, where Hassan Nasrallah's funeral was just observed, and I knew there was going to be stops of people who had attended that as journalists, and we'll talk about that in a second. So as I was being led down a hallway by this officer, he turns to me and he said, I caught your last appearance on Judge Napolito. I guess he wasn't Italian because it's Judge Napolitano. And he leads me into a cavernous secondary screening room. Doesn't put my passport in the case that they usually do. And he says, this is just a friendly visit. You're not a target of anything, which, it just felt to me like he's trying to warm me up for something. Stands across from me at a metal table, places a questionnaire before me with basic information that, I didn't have any problem giving, but perhaps I shouldn't have participated at all. But it was 3 a.m. I was with my family. I gave my itinerary, which they already know, and my contact info, whatever. Then he flips over the sheet and there's a list of handwritten names there. And I wasn't allowed to photograph them. There were just a handful of names. The majority of them were Muslim names that were so common that it was even difficult to know if I knew any of those people. He asked me, "Do you know any of these people?" One of them was like Mohammed Khan. And then there were two other names, Nicole Smith, which, I can't think of anyone named Nicole Smith except for Anna Nicole Smith, the late model who died under suspicious circumstances at age 39, after being married to like a nonagenarian zillionaire. And then there was Susan Benjamin. I didn't know that name either. But then, the officer lets me out after I say, I don't know. He tries to ask me a few other questions, and I'm becoming less participatory. So he goes into a little room, comes out, and lets me go. Still don't know what it's about. Clearly, it's not about me being in Nicaragua. Like, they didn't seem to be that interested in that. And he lets me out. And then Anya, my wife, is well known to all the Grayzone community, starts Googling the names we could remember. And Susan Benjamin comes up as Medea Benjamin. I didn't know that was her birth name. We knew Medea wasn't a Karen, but we didn't know she was a Susan. So that to me is disturbing. I spoke to Medea the following day, which was like 72 hours ago. And she told me that she had been harassed for a long period by the feds. Every time she returned from the country, they'd try to subject her to questioning. The FBI was calling her, asking for an interview. And then she started filing a series of complaints and they stopped. But based on my experience, she wonders if the harassment will begin again. I can only speculate on what led to me being flagged. I don't know if this is a new initiative of the Trump administration and Kash Patel, who Aaron has interviewed twice at the Grayzone, or I was flagged from something prior. I mean, this was my first international trip since my humanitarian intervention on Tony Blinken at his last press briefing. But I don't know if it relates to that. I don't know what it was about, and that's part of the kind of harassment where you just don't know why the black hand of the federal government is hovering over you. Some likened it to like a tap on the shoulder, and others find it more severe. But clearly, it pales in comparison to what Richard Medhurst, Ali Abunimah, Eve Engler, and Kit Clarenberg and others have gone through. And that's partly because we're in the United States, where we have a First Amendment, we have free speech protection. But the attention should remain focused on those other cases, especially Richard Medhurst, who has had to, he's being accused by Austria of literally being a Hamas member for his journalism. So I just thought it was important to document what happened with me and to kind of inform the public about it.
Yeah. And the fact that Medea Benjamin is worthy of that much scrutiny, that people would be asked about her. I mean, that speaks to I think, just the influence that Code Pink has had in, I mean, what are they really best known for? They confront politicians. They go into their hearings and they call them out, especially for the Gaza genocide. Code Pink's been at the forefront of that. And that is a bipartisan policy. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that sort of a crackdown on that would continue under Trump. Trump recently launched a so-called anti-Semitism task force. And what's that going to be? Just a front for the government to go after people who speak out against the Gaza genocide and to even deport them.
Yeah.
If they're foreign students and the like.
Yeah. And we just learned that Trump has appointed as deputy director of the FBI Dan Bongino. I don't know if this was a Bongino job, but I do remember back in, when was it? October 13th, 2023. So just a few days after October 7th, Dan Bongino, this is the dude, deputy director of the FBI. He freaked out and had a meltdown because Hamas announced a day of rage, calling for protests in Jerusalem, thousands of miles away. And Bongino, who has a McMansion in Sanford, Florida, on the beach, freaked out and said, "F the savages. I'm living my life tomorrow. I'll be cautious. And yes, I'm concerned. I addressed it all today, but F the savages. If they're going to have their day of rage or whatever they call it, then I'm going to have my day of go F yourself." So real tough guy was worried that Hamas was going to invade America and come to Florida and, stage an Al-Aqsa flood invasion of the shores of Florida. And he like went ballistic when I mocked him for it on his program. But these are the kind of characters that are now in the FBI. So I mean, they're like fanatically pro-Israel, paranoid about Palestine solidarity activism, can't seem to distinguish between activism and Hamas militancy. And again, I don't know if this was a Trump flag or something else, but there's the temperature is definitely rising, and the Trump administration is not going to turn it down on Palestine solidarity activism. I mean, we saw students at Barnard University, they're completely masked. They're covering their identity completely because several of them have been expelled from school for their activism. What we're seeing in Europe is far more severe. And David Miller, our colleague who is in the UK, was detained by 8 counterterror cops, I think just yesterday, returning from the Hassan Nasrallah funeral, which he was covering, which, I mean, at least he knows what this is about. This is it's clearly repression. He was there as a journalist, not there to like provide material support to a proscribed organization. And he described how he was treated. Monday, February 24th, he got off a plane from Istanbul to Heathrow. In front of him were a wide circle of people waiting for someone. He knew it was him. One of them, SO-15, former Special Branch plainclothes officer of the Counter-Terror Command, asked for his passport and whether he started his journey in Istanbul. Of course, he knew that they knew that was not the case. In any case, I had done nothing wrong. As I said to them, visiting Beirut to cover the funeral of Syed Hassan Nasrallah. That was his first taste of Schedule 7. They started to explain what Schedule 7 was, and I said, yes, I know about it. I'm a researcher who studies terrorism legislation. And he realized that the circle of people had been waiting for him. There were 8 officers to detain him. And others have been detained as well, coming back to the US and subjected to interrogations from that event, which was buzzed by 3 Israeli F-16 jets. There was a flyover and an attempt to intimidate them. And apparently Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, considered bombing the funeral, which would have killed possibly tens of thousands of unarmed people simply because of their politics and ideology. So again, what's happening overseas is far more severe. It's still within the realm of Five Eyes.
I wanted to say a few words about Dan Bongino, who you mentioned earlier, the new deputy director of the FBI. Prior to October 7th, 2023, I knew of Dan Bongino as, obviously a Trump guy, a right-wing pundit, but who did really good work on Russiagate. And in fact, on his podcast, he would often cite the work that I did on Russiagate. And he wrote a book about it that I thought was really good. That's what I mainly knew him as. But then after October 7th, I saw someone like repeating what I just thought was unhinged propaganda. And like you showed that example before, this is another one where he went after Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, and accused her of trying to start a religious war in the U.S. And this is the new deputy director of the FBI, accusing a member of Congress of trying to ignite a religious war, repeats terrorist propaganda, who's an enemy of the U.S. And what I tried to point out in response to this was that, like, to me, this allegation that people who criticize Israel, who criticize mass murder, are enemies of the U.S. and traitors, it's very similar to what was used during Russiagate, when people in the Trump camp, people who were skeptical of the national security state, they were accused of being Kremlin sympathizers. And I try to make the point that it's actually a similar playbook, which, in our brief exchange, like we got into a brief exchange on Twitter, he did not really appreciate. But I think it's unfortunate that people in the Trump camp can't see the connection between the sort of neo-McCarthyism that was directed against them and a similar playbook being used against people who oppose genocide, who are critical of the Israeli government. And even if Trump supporters don't agree with the word genocide, the fact is, just because you're critical of a foreign government doesn't necessarily make you someone trying to start a religious war, as he accused Rashida Tlaib. And what I said was that was also Islamophobic, which he didn't appreciate. But it's just interesting to me that people can see the cynicism of Russiagate, but they can't see a similar playbook involved in demonizing critics of Israel. And unfortunately, the new deputy director of the FBI has fallen for that. And I won't be surprised. Like, on the one hand, I welcome people who want to bring sunlight to Russiagate, to the FBI. That was a massive scandal with huge consequences. And I do expect that with people like that at the FBI, we'll be learning some important disclosures about that. But at the same time, I'm concerned that they're going to weaponize their agency now to go after people who support Palestine, just as the Biden administration did too. So that policy is bipartisan, but it's just that's unfortunately an aspect of MAGA. It's like they can recognize the absurdity of all this Russiagate stuff, but not similar characteristics when it comes to going after supporters of Palestinian rights.
No, it's not like they're principled critics of the new Cold War. It's like the Democrats during the Bush era on the Iraq War. There was a partisan imperative for defending Trump against the Russiagate hoax because he was the target and Dan Bongino was climbing through the ranks of Trump Incorporated and Conservatism Incorporated. He is a sort of astroturf figure who comes actually from corporate media. They call him a podcaster, but he is a creation of a corporate media complex that also profited heavily from Rush Limbaugh, just spreading rage and dividing people. Bongino stepped into Limbaugh's slot. It was Westwood One, this giant corporation that syndicates radio, basically pays stations to put on various shock jock personalities that divide people along partisan lines in a really extreme fashion because it's profitable. Their board is just a collection of corporate sleazebags who actually don't share the ideology of the hosts. Westwood One is owned by Cumulus Media. Just look at their board of directors. These are the people who brought us not just Dan Bongino, but Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is syndicated in media across the country. And you listen to him and it's like unlistenable. He's not very charismatic. He's not that talented. He doesn't share the views of people in a lot of the deep red areas that he's being pushed. But, he pushes the program of the corporate executives, extreme free market capitalism, dividing people with social issues. And they are actually given directives not to oppose Israel. They were certainly given a directive after January 6th not to challenge the election. That was something Westwood One handed down, and Dan Bongino had some friction with them. But, it's not like there's a meritocracy in the world of right-wing radio. It's corporate radio. It's corporate media. And they weren't challenging Russiagate because they feared outbreak of world war between nuclear powers. It was to protect the head of their power mafia. So that, that's why they're being so inconsistent. And absolutely, the Trump national security state will escalate against Palestine solidarity activism. We saw the FBI go after students from George Mason University who were Palestinian Americans who were campaigning against the genocide on campus. Their homes were raided by FBI Joint Terror Task forces with local police. So it didn't start during the Trump administration, but I'm sure it will escalate. And again, I don't know if I was flagged for that reason, but we need to be vigilant. And if you're an activist, if you're involved in any way, know your rights. The Supreme Court ruled in 1969 that police can lie to you in order to elicit a criminal confession of something you might not have even done. They are talking to you in order to get you talking, to see if they can entrap or manipulate you or turn you. And the ACLU has said again and again that if you're at an airport, the Customs and Border Protection does not have a right to prevent you from entering the country unless you are accused of a crime and they have a warrant. So you have the right to remain silent.